Lucky you.
36 best holes in
Into
golf.
Alternate Shots podcast,
Barney's Army.
where we talk about
Sandy.
golf, poker,
James Bond.
horse racing,
Double.
classic movies.
Zenyatta.
We have no script.
Down the stretch they come.
We are glad you joined us.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Well, Billy, we are so blessed today. We are with two Wingfoot legends. I can't think of any two brothers at Wingfoot that have done more, and maybe Wingfoot's done more for them. We're going to find out. But we're with none other than John on my right, John on my left, rather, John Hoffman in the blue, keeping him warm sweater because it's a little chilly. And then Paul Hoffman, I guess that's a gray sweater you got there, Paul. Boy, I've been looking forward to this day. We've been catching up over the last few years every now and then. It's so great to have you both here with Billy Regan and me.
Great to be here.
Great to be here for sure. Looking forward to it.
So, John, you started this. Tell us how you got to Wingfoot. What was the journey that got you there? Did your mother just drop you off and said, find work? What was it?
My cousin, Bruce, who just passed away, caddied there. He's 6 months younger than me. So he went up there when he was probably 12 or 13. He lived in Larchmont, and he was there, and we were moving from Mount Vernon to Harrison. And so he said, you got to come to Wingfoot. You got to come with me. So I turned in my paper route. And when I did, gave them all I had about 3 routes or something. The guy, when I told him what I was going to do, he wanted me to get a route in Harrison. And I said, no, I'm going to caddy at Wingfoot. And he said to my mother, who was with me, I don't know if you want him hanging around the caddies and whatever, being in the caddy yard at a golf course.
That's a great story. Paul, tell us about how you found your way to Wingfoot.
Well, the more you know about me, the more you'll realize that I followed my brother around. He was kind of my lead man. And so since he went up there in 61, I was 12, 62 or maybe 63. When I was 12 years old, I went up there and I started caddying, doing singles. And I didn't quite much love the caddying part of it as John did. John would do 2 loops a day, 60 days in a row. But I was lucky in that I ended up going to work for Mo in the pro shop when I was about 14, I'd say. And then when I got my license, I was lucky enough to park cars with Danny and Willie. And John had done each of those things as well. And the real money was in parking cars. And yeah, you could caddy and you could be out there for hours making money in contacts. But that was the part that I really liked. So 62
was the real money in the glove compartment of the cars or in the tips?
Don't get me started. There were some shady characters. We had to lock those cars.
Yeah, I bet.
Did you ever have any cars stolen under your watch?
We always had to be careful of the doctor's cars. Let's just say that.
Well, we'll leave it at that. What was a good tip back in those days? Did you get dollars, $5? Did anybody tip you that kind of money back then?
A buck was common. Change was sometimes common. We had those really good guys. There was a guy named Mr. Robbins who used to give us $5 on the way in. So he basically had a prime spot on the road for most of the day. Sidney Thompson was another big one. Herbie Allen was another big tipper. There were $5 was a good tip. $1 was a norm, I would say.
I'll give you a story that my uncle worked for a guy by the name of Bob. What was his name, Paul? Bob Hamlin. And he was a member. And he was a little guy, and he had a bit of a Napoleon complex, I think. But anyway, he acted like he was a big guy. And he would come out in the middle of a rush on Saturday afternoon and say, hey, Johnny, I know that guy. His uncle works for me. Hey, Johnny, get me my car. And I'd bring it up, and he'd have $5 in his hand that he was waving around while he was asking me to go. And he would come, and he was going to Connecticut, so we kept the car facing up towards the new flagpole. And I'd let him in, and as he'd get in, he'd put the $5 in his pocket, and he'd hand me 2 quarters. So he did it once. He did it a second time. The third time, and he'd do it because he was bragging to all these members how he knew this guy and whatever. Third time, I dropped the quarters onto the blacktop, and got down on my hands and knees and said, "I'll get him. I'm sorry, I dropped that." And he was so mortified, he almost ran me over as he took his long.
I thought you were
Cadillac
going to
to
say
get
you
him.
put the quarters in his shirt pocket and then grabbed the $5 bill and said, "See you later to Connecticut."
I probably should have. Yeah, anyway, that's the kind of stuff that would go on out there.
Now, what about the celebrities? You know, celebrities in my day rolled up there. You recall any big name celebrities that, you know, I know Bill Fugazi used to bring up Bob Hope. I'm sure that happened in your time. Do you
Yes.
remember Bing Crosby?
No, I don't remember Bing. Vince Lombardi, I caddied for Vince Lombardi one time. He was up there.
What kind of a golfer was he? I'd be very curious to know about that.
He was
was a better
not bad.
coach?
He probably shot, high 80s, low 90s, but he never spent much time at it, as you can imagine, because
Yeah, he was busy. Yeah.
Was he brought up there by Chuck Mercine, who's still a member at Wingfoot and played for him?
No.
Or maybe Gifford?
Or
Mr. Mara?
It was some older people. I can't remember now. It wasn't Wellington Mara, because he coached for Wellington Mara.
Right.
On the Giants. But I can't remember who it was. I remember one time going to Mike Minucci's house to bellhop for a party he was throwing for Harlan Sfare, and Lombardi was there, Jim Lee Howell was there, Davey Marr was there. It was amazing. And it was right after I graduated from college, and he asked me to just make sure all the cars got parked. It was over where Gifford also lived at that
It's just
time.
down there out of the Fenimore Road and to the right.
Fenimore Road.
What was it called? Grand Park or something like that?
What a night that was. And after I parked about 3 cars and just directed everybody in, he told me, "Come on in, spend the time in the party with us." And I was like a kid in a candy store at that party. I didn't drink anything, but I wanted to meet all these great sports figures.
Well, Minucci's daughter is still a member at Wingfoot, and that was the place to be, right? Minucci's. But if you weren't at Minucci's, you were at Toots Shores, right?
That's right.
We're 21. I want to give a Vince Lombardi story because I think it's really appropriate. So this time when he came up to play, he asked if we could get his suit pressed because he had an engagement that night. And we used to get our shirts and slacks that we worked in at Wingfoot done down at the cleaners down on Mamaroneck Avenue. And so I drove down there with his suit and I walked in and I said, "Hey, can I get this suit pressed because he has an engagement tonight?" And the guy said, "I'm sorry, Paul, but we're all shut down. We can't do it." I said, "Oh, shoot, it's for Vince Lombardi." And he really wanted the suit look nice. And he goes, "This is for Vince Lombardi?" He said, "Don't worry about it. We're opening up the presses for him. Come back in 15 minutes. We'll have it done for you." So that's the power of Vince Lombardi.
Well, you had to, like in those days, you were more than just a guy that went back and forth to the lower or the upper parking lot. I remember guys would give you $20 and you take it down the hill to get a car wash. And any other kind of interesting stories other than just parking the Cadillac that came up?
Any joyriding?
I got one for you. I did drive Ruin Arledge's Corvette down there a few times to get washed. But another practice that we had is if it was really, really busy, we had to get those cars off the road. So we might have 4 guys parking cars on a busy tournament day. And so we would use one car as kind of the shuttle. And three guys would take cars down, park them, get in the shuttle, come back, get 3 more, take the car back. And there was a guy named Vic DeRobertis one time, and he saw us. Vic. He saw us shuttling his car around. He was a great guy. I really liked Vic and Val. But he saw us shuttling his car around, and we got off that 10th green on the East Course. He came over to us and says, "If I ever see you guys shuttling my car, I don't want you driving my car around as a taxi here any longer."
You know that I used to caddy for Vic DeRobertis. That was the big game with Don Scott. And one time he had a very wry sense of humor. One time I was on 17 West playing, not caddying that day, with my friends, probably Bart McDade or JP O'Hara, somebody like that. And there were these evergreens between the back of 17 West Green and 11 East Green. And I remember missing a 6-footer, and I said, "Shit," loud enough, to hear 20 yards further. Well, the next day I'm caddying. That was a Friday, Saturday, and Vic DeRobertis comes out of the locker room onto the East Course. They only played the East Course, right by you probably. And he said, "Oh, Bobby, you are in big trouble. The board's talking about you." I'm like, "What did I do?" I had no idea what I did. And he heard from his wife, who could have cared less about that 4-letter word. And she told him, and he figured he was going to put me away. And he said, the board, your dad's got to come in, blah, blah, blah. And I said, what happened? He says, you remember you missed that 6-foot putt on the 17th hole? Well, my wife was on the 11th hole and she heard every syllable of that 4-letter word. Yep.
Frank was a big broker, and he worked for Walston and Company, where Bill Fleming and a lot of other wing footers were bigwigs, and he was a big producer. And he had a stock by the name of Four Seasons Nursing Homes at that time that he sold to every customer he had. And I would keep his books for him and whatever when he was doing all this selling. And after a while, the stock just hit the tank, went downhill. The guy who was the CEO, I think, was put in jail. He was a former, I forget what, and the stock became worthless. And Vic DeRobertis had that ice cream store like in Midtown, not far from where our office was on 55th and 6th. And I saw him and he said, I got robbed. I said, what do you mean you got robbed? He said, they came in and robbed all this stuff. They opened my safe. The only thing they left was all the stock certificates for Four Seasons right on the floor. They were smart enough to know, and I wasn't smart enough to know not to invest in that thing.
So what about the opens? You had the 72 open. That was the ladies open, the 74 open. Didn't have any real opens in the 60s, did we?
I got there 2 years after the 59 open. Heard the stories about Billy O'Hara caddying for Jack Nicklaus as an amateur. And then from all the time I caddied until I went in the service, there were no tournaments. And then I was in the service from 69 to 73. I got out and there was a tournament in 74. I had a friend in the service with me who came and stayed with my mother so he could caddy in that tournament. He caddied for Steve Melnick. But I was working for SBC at the time, so I couldn't take the time off to caddy, but I died 1,000 deaths wishing I could have.
Well, yeah, the story there is Peter McGarry, who grew up in the Manor in Larchmont, his family moved to Denver, and he wrote Gene Hayden a note the summer before, could I come up and caddy? And he came up. We did a video with Peter probably 8 years ago in the lower locker room before one of our big events, and he came, and out of that, you know how it worked, right? It was a fishbowl in the lower locker room. They picked a number.
Amazing.
Did you guys play wing foot a lot?
I used to work, I'd play it maybe 8 times a summer, 6 times a summer, because I would work on Mondays if there was some action. I don't know, Paul, I don't know how much you played it in those days. When you were caddy, you didn't play much, but I loved the game. And, but, you know, played it enough, caddied it enough where I knew every blade of grass on there, knew the greens very well, but never played it enough. But I got back in 2009, we got put into the Carmara tournament, and I was at Bel Air at the time, and Jim Nance is the one who went to the Maras and said, if you're looking for one more club, you want to get Bel Air. So we got put in and we went there, and Wingfoot was winning by about 16 points after the first day. It was a Stableford type deal. And we came back on the next day and won it. And so that was my chance to finally play in a tournament at Wingfoot. We actually won the Carmara that day, and they handed me the mic when they gave the award out and asked me to say something about Wingfoot. And I probably went a half hour to an hour too long talking about
that's what happens when you feel
the road from the Daily Argus to Wingfoot and the great things that it had done for me in my life.
Yeah, not
I'm
many
sure
people
all the
know
losers
about
were
that.
glad to hear all about it too, right?
What's that?
Yeah.
I'm sure all the guys you beat were just lapping it up.
Well,
It's still going on.
The Irish were happy. They put a tray of something out there that we were all going to share. And it's the only night in my life that I've ever could say I was drunk, because I started sipping those things. We were staying at Harlan Beatrice's house on the course, so I didn't have to drive anywhere. But the next morning I had a 6:30 flight, and I think I was still affected as I drove to LaGuardia.
So I'll tell you a story about, you asked about playing. I didn't play much at all. I worked there 6 days a week. So day off, I went to the beach over at Rye Beach or Westchester Country Club Beach or something. But when we did play, I remember my cousin Greg and I, he caddied there as well. He was from Larchmont, Greg McGrath, Bruce's brother. And years later, we would talk about the days when you caddied for Tommy Armour. It was a great loop because it was 9 holes. It was on a cart. Clearly, he would hit it straight and, probably shoot par in those days. And at the end of the round, he would give you the 3 balls he played with plus his glove. Now, his glove would go up to your sleeve because he had big hands and we were little kids. But we used to play with those balls, when we would play, and we'd lose them. And we talked about it years later and said, do you know how valuable those golf balls and gloves would be today if we had kept those things?
Oh, that's just incredible. I thought you were going to say you were like caddying for Tommy Armour because it was 9 holes and then he brought you into the grill room for an hour and a half of frescas. What was your relationship with the guys there? You had Claude, you had Mickey Zucca, you had Mo Dellaporta. Those 3 are in the Hall of Fame of people that are around Winged Foot, right?
We're like family. I mean, we really were. Dick Harmon was in John's wedding. I mentioned to you that I caddied for Dick and Craig, and when they won the Anderson, John's won the Anderson and club championship, I'm sure, on multiple occasions. I remember one story of his with Dick Gelb, the guy who, what was it, Revlon that he was CEO of?
He was Bristol Myers. He was the CEO of Bristol Myers for many years. But he was a member at Century. And I always caddied for a guy named Sam Neild, who was a very good player, but he never won the club championship. Went to the finals a couple of times. Didn't make it to the back 9 or the back 8 of the East because Buddy Stewart spun him like a top. But they were playing in the member guest, the big member guest championship flight, and they were doing a practice round. And on the first hole, he was in the left rough. Gelb was, and Neild came over, and they were playing for a little bit of money, which Neild needed to make. And he went over and said, it's about 180. You got 180 in. That's the one over the bunker you talked about.
Yeah.
And he went away and he looked at me and I said, no, you got about 205. And he never forgot me for that. He never forgot that I did that because I have my steady guy on my right shoulder and I got you on my left shoulder. I got to take care of my guy, but I'm taking care of both because these are 2 loops I have, not 1. So many years later, he wanted to hire me when I was getting out of the service, and he every time he saw me when I was parking cars, he went out of his way to make sure he took care of me and whatever. So Paul and I are playing at Cypress. This is 10 or 15 years ago. And we went in the clubhouse before we went out, and I saw R. Gelb on one of the lockers. He was sharing it with someone. They're not the most luxurious lockers, about the same as Winged Foot's, except Winged Foot's are bigger. So anyway, I got out on the course and I said, is Dick Gelb a member here? They said, oh, yeah. He said, he's here all the time. I said, no, this guy lives in Connecticut. No, he's here now. He lives here. And I said, geez. So we went around. When we were getting through, I said, I want to leave a note for him in his locker. And as we're putting the clubs in the car, there he is on the first tee. So I run over and say hello to him. And he says, Johnny. And he turns to the guy and he says, I got to tell you a story about this guy. And he starts telling him about that shot on the 1 West where I gave him the right club instead of letting him put it in the front bunker.
Unbelievable. Well, there's that great Mickey Mantle. Mickey Mantle used to play a lot at Winged Foot. You guys he must have run you over trying to get to see Donnie and Scanlon and his brother to play a match, right?
I never caddied for Mantle there. I know he played a couple of times there when I was there, but maybe later with Paul, I don't know. But I never caddied for him. But he was my confirmation name is Michael because of Mickey Mantle. They wouldn't let me take Mickey, so I took Michael. And, he was my man.
He was everybody's man in New York.
We talked a little bit, John alluded to a job that he got coming out of Winged Foot. And, you have to ask yourself a question of how many careers were spawned by the CEOs and executives from Winged Foot to the caddies that worked there. In both of our cases, I think, true to say, our first 2 jobs were from members at Winged Foot. My first one was at Shields and Company, Corny Shields,
Oh,
sent me to an interview on Wall Street with his firm. And that was where I went first. And my second was with your dad's company, SBC. And I remember I interviewed with them before I took the job on Wall Street, but because of guys like Frank Crimmins and all those stockbrokers who were making tons of money, I said, I really want to give a hand to this stock market stuff. And as you know, stock market or stockbrokers aren't paid a salary, they're just paid a commission. You know, so you had to pay, you know, make your keep, if you would. And after about 2 years, SBC had stayed after me, and John was working there at the time. And I ended up going there. And so my first two jobs were from members of Wingfoot. And I know, John, same is true for you.
Yeah, Crimmins, and then your father, Jack Williams. I was on leave with about 6 months to go in the Air Force. And I got him, and I'd never, I don't know when he joined, but this was 1972, summer of 72.
Just a few years before that, John.
Yes.
Like late 60s.
And so we go around 18 holes, and he knew I was in the service. He knew a little bit. And, you know, he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm here interviewing, trying to find a job for when I get out. I've got 3 kids and another one on the way. And, you know, up and park cars at night sometimes while I was working at SBC. And finally, he went to a guy named Charlie Fisher, who was his Eastern regional guy, and said, I don't know, what the heck are you paying this guy, John Hoffman? Why is he working Sunday nights parking cars when he's working for me? You know, why aren't we paying him enough?
We can because that was their club. You know, the Wesley family from Mamaroneck, Gus,
Kenny
and
Wesley,
and
Herbie Wesley,
Kenny and Al, and they worked at IBM, a lot of them, but they were there on the weekends. It was their club. And that's what I try to tell people, is there's so many 40 and 50-year employees at Wingfoot because they're treated right. It's their club as much as ours. There's two you remember at Wingfoot that you're never going to forget. What is it you know from your 2 experiences?
Well, first of all, for me, Gene Hayden. Gene was a taskmaster. He never let you get a big head. You know, Paul wrote in this thing that I got Caddy of the Year all these years and whatever. Maybe I did. I guess I did a few times, maybe 5 or 6 times. But he never let me act like I was the guy. As soon as he thought I might be getting that way, he'd give me some lady who couldn't hit it 30 yards and let me walk around with her for a day, and I'd be back
down to earth.
But he was a taskmaster, but taught me an awful lot about what it's like to work to be the best. You know, show up on a rainy day and say, I'm trying to help Gene out. And
So you stay with those lessons.
Caddies.
Yeah.
Being around those caddies, you know, the kids, a lot of great kids all went on to good schools, and a lot of them have joined Wingfoot, and some of them have been club presidents at Wingfoot who used to caddy with us.
Thanks for joining us today.
Billy Harmon.
We really appreciate your
Double
feedback.
Indemnity.
And please
Arky.
subscribe to the
Two
show
Outer.
and hit the
Claude
bell
Harmon.
icon so you get notified
Movie Classics.
of new episodes.
Mark Gable.
Hit them
Odd
hard
Job.
and hit them off.
Best 36 holes.